If you're utilizing criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness, you're not going to have the connection, the trust, and the feelings of belonging that you need to have healthy conversations and heal hurt relationships or wounded relationships. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Say it again.
You're not the boss of me.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
Nope.
All righty. So today we are going to talk about how to have difficult conversations with your...
Apparently, I have to be careful what I say before you start recording, because now you're just going to start recording whenever you want.
Heck yeah, I am. I think it's funny.
And I'm just naive enough to listen to you say that again, and do it anyway.
Who's the boss of you?
Me.
Apparently not. Just go back in and listen to this. All righty. So today we are going to talk about engaging in difficult conversations. This is going to be really important for those of you if you're in the Mormon church or out of the Mormon church or the high demand religion or the toxic system or whatever it is. This podcast is going to talk about how to have hard conversations that are potentially going to turn into an argument, how we can do that in a manner that manages conflict, hopefully keeps things on neutral ground, and works to everybody's benefit so that we can communicate, connect, and continue to foster feelings that we belong and are a part of those family and peer systems that have always been there for us. So welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma.
Yeah. I think also not at all exclusive to religious conversations, right? Many of us engage in difficult conversations.
Dude, it feels like you started in the middle of a sentence or an idea.
Not at all. Just adding on to what you said, my first thought when you started saying, for religious conversations and stuff is like, this applies in all aspects of life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. What
this
we're
is
talking
really
about...
more about conversation and learning to go more than surface deep and things like that, and intellectualize something very important information.
Well, and what I've done is, so I've taken the Gottman training. So I am not Gottman certified, mostly because I just don't have the time to go do their, I don't even know how many hours it is of training up in Seattle or whatever. I've done their online one. So I think, actually I might be certified because I did it through the PESI thing. So, but I'm not going to claim certification, but I've done the certification course. I've been utilizing this in my clinic for several years within
definitely
couples
what you teach, yeah.
And family. Right. This is my go-to stuff. As far as how to use what I'm going to call the Gottman curriculum within other areas of your life. Yeah, these are healthy communication skills that foster relationship growth. And so I want to make sure that our listeners know that I am going to be sharing with you a great deal of the resources. You're going to see strong similarities. I will do my best to make sure that I am giving the direct quote credit back to Dr. John and Julie Gottman for this, but I want to make that abundantly clear from the get-go. I did not develop this. This is coming directly from the research of Drs. John and Julie Gottman at the Gottman Institute. And that we're going to be adapting some of the communication skills that they utilize for conversations that can be, inside or outside familial relationships, but specific to transition from one system to another, whether that be religion, whether that be, a work environment. And most of the examples that we're going to pull today are going to be about family members or individuals within the Mormon system and those without, because again, that's where our area of expertise is, and that's kind of our primary focus here is unpacking Mormonism. But yes, I agree with you, Mason. These skills can be utilized in multiple environments with very little adaptation to them.
Yeah.
So plug in if you're wanting to go to the source material for this. We will link it in the show notes again. We just got on my website and recognized that the source material and whatnot is missing. Like there's a whole bunch of it missing. So I got to call my website people and get that there. But this is, if you're wanting to do your the research on your own about where you can find these skills and tools, you can go to the Gottman Institute's website or their book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. You're also going to see these in Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children, also by the Gottmans. The Relationship Cure by the Gottmans. Like basically, if it's a book written by John and Julie Gottman, you're going to be seeing different versions of this material. So definitely want to give them
stuff, right?
Right. Well, yes, that's where you're going to find it. And then I've taken the huge, long. It was like 26 hours or something of the training videos and continued education stuff that I did in order to complete their certification training course. I finished the course. I don't think that actually makes me certified, but I can print a thing off the internet that says I am, I guess, if I wanted to. So cool. Anyway, all righty. So a quick review of yesterday. So before engaging in the conversation.
So yesterday for us, not yesterday for you. It would have been last week. We recorded
episode
it yesterday,
15.
but it would have been episode 15 where we talked about recognizing or identifying when people are ready to have
this
a difficult conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to go over just a brief overview of that again, just how you recognize, and then move on to, okay, now you've recognized that the conversation is possible. What do we do now? How do we have this conversation without just screwing it all up?
Well, you might screw it up even if you do everything right. Just letting you know that's normal.
Sure.
We've got
they're hard conversations.
Yeah, we've got another. We could do another training session on what to do after you f it up, for sure. But yes, Mason, exactly what you said. So it would have been the episode prior to this one where we talked about how to determine whether or not you and or the person you're wanting to have the conversation with are ready to engage in this. And then the number one thing that we talked about was identifying what brain space they're in. Are they in their frontal cortex or are they in their amygdala? Is their survival mechanisms on board? Are they what the Gottmans call emotionally flooded? Meaning heart rate, is that elevated or not? Blood pressure, is it elevated or not? And one of the things that we talked about in episode 15 was learning how to decipher that based on verbal and nonverbal cues. We also talked about how to tell based on the little snippets that you've had with this person in general. And then we talked about taking a simple topic and trying it on to see where you and this other individual are. So I just want to say that this is actually a skill, like scanning for the participation, anyway, whatever. The dudes and dudettes.
The members of the conversation.
Within the conversation, right. You're going to want to consistently be aware of those nonverbal and verbal cues that indicate whether or not they've tripped into their 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn survival mechanisms, or if they've become emotionally flooded. And also check in with yourself, because once again, as that amygdala kicks in, your frontal cortex, logical reasoning, creative problem solving skills are impaired. They diminish in those cases. And sometimes it's a need for, hang on, let me just take a breath. I just need a couple of seconds. Let me just, hey, amygdala, I'm doing okay. Right. And other times, one of the things that the Gottmans talk about is you need to take a time out from the conversation and say, I'm feeling flooded, or you know what, I'm getting really angry right now. I need to take a break because I don't want to say something hurtful when I'm feeling really triggered. And then you've got to give, and then you walk away and you do your, physiological and psychological soothing exercises, which might be deep breathing or going for a walk, or this is where that RAID worksheet comes in. If you're looking for that RAID worksheet or you don't know what we're talking about, go to my website, daisygirlcommunications.com, and under the tab handouts, the RAID handout is there. You can download it. It costs 99 cents to download the RAID worksheet, but that gives you those steps for psychologically soothing and discharging and completing the emotional cycle, so that way you can get back into that frontal cortex. And when you do that, when you have to disengage from a conversation and say, hey, I'm feeling really triggered, I just need to stop for a minute, give me like 20 minutes. You need to do the give me 20 minutes, or hey, can we talk about this again tomorrow morning? Or you've got to give a time that you're coming back to the conversation. And then you've got to follow through on that time. Even if you're not feeling ready, it's important for you to follow up, because if you don't, the person that you're walking away from is going to feel abandoned, and that's going to get their amygdala up. It's going to be, you can't talk about hard things. You always walk away. You never come back. You disengage. Or what that ends up being is stonewalling. If I'm just walking away and never coming back and not giving that indication of, I need about 30 minutes to just chill. Let's come back to this in about 30 minutes. If you don't come back, you've stonewalled, and that harms those conversations. According to the Gottmans, that's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or a sign that the relationship is in danger. If you're consistently stonewalling, the relationship is in a great deal of danger.
Well, and from my own experience, even doing these things and doing them pretty well doesn't mean that you're going to have success in the conversation. They're just the pieces that have to be in place in order for you to do it. We've had plenty of times where we had to take a break, and then we came back, and shortly after trying to talk about it again, it's like, whoa, okay, we need another break. And I think recognizing that's important. One of the things I had to learn, and am still learning, is that just because we schedule or we plan to have a conversation does not mean that I should expect to see it through to the end.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And if I try to do that, if my goal is we have to get through this conversation, it's not going to be as effective as if my goal is we need to start this conversation. We need to be able to respectfully start talking about the issues that are a struggle for us, and then be able to quit the conversation while we're still in a decent and healthy place.
Right. Well, and it's important to recognize stonewalling, again, it's not a quote unquote bad thing. It's damaging to relationships if it's happening consistently, but stonewalling at its core is a protective response. It's I'm disengaging because I don't want to get yelled at. This is too hard. I don't want to do this. When we talk about me right now with your family, Mason, I'm stonewalling several members of your family. They keep coming at me like, you need to come and talk to us. Like, we want to involve you. We want to have a relationship with you. And for me, I'm like, hey, because I don't have a history of this being a two-way street. Like, I've tried for 20 years and I got nothing. And then every single time we try and engage, it's this huge blow up negative mess. That's not a relationship I am interested in trying to fix. And so I continue to stonewall that. Now, if I was doing that to you, my husband, it's a recipe for marriage failure. Absolutely. Right. But I'm not married to your siblings.
Well, and it could be a recipe for the fact that that relationship will never recover either, but it also might just be, there's other things I have to focus on right now. And that's really what that's really what I feel it's been. It's just that there's other things that are more important right now than trying to heal a relationship I feel like I put a lot into trying to build and never got reciprocation, or at least not very much. And now I'm not ready to try again.
Right. Well, and I'm willing to admit that when it comes to, the one sister that keeps trying to build a relationship with me, I'm going to be the first person to admit that no relationship is going to be built until I stop stonewalling.
Yeah.
But I'm not in a place where I want to stop stonewalling, because every time there's any type of interaction, anytime I've attempted, it's gone to shit so fast. I'm like, yep, nope, not ready. Yeah. I'm not engaging that. And so there is going to be that sense of identifying, we talk about these 4 horsemen. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the Gottman method is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And all 4 of those, quote unquote horsemen that are indications that the relationship is in trouble, if you're utilizing those, if you're utilizing criticism and contempt and defensiveness and stonewalling within the relationships, you're going to have toxic communication patterns. You're going to have really harsh arguments that are emotionally wounding to your partner. And yeah, I agree with the Gottmans, and I mean, their research supports it. Your relationship's in trouble, and the Gottmans can predict with like over 90% accuracy whether or not a couple are going to get divorced based on watching them argue for less than a couple minutes. And the reason is because we're looking at those patterns. And so anytime I've tried to engage in a relationship with certain members of your family, it's turned into, those statements like your marriage is doomed.
Right.
Sarah has nothing of worth to say. Listening to Sarah is the world's greatest waste of time. I know a lot of people are like, man, you're really hung up on that. You must be really offended and you're not getting over it. No, I'm not offended at all. I mean, it hurt my feelings when it happened today. It doesn't bother me at all. That's data. For me, what they've done is data. Am I ready to take down my wall and engage in that relationship? No, because I don't have supporting data that anything has changed.
Right.
So keep that in mind as you're engaging in these conversations. You've got to consistently screen for where you are and where others are. Because if you are engaging in these conversations and you are utilizing the quote unquote 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which it doesn't have to be within a marriage. This is within any partnership, relationship at work, intimate, familial, mother to son, dad to daughter, parent, child, any of that. If you're utilizing criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness, you're not going to have the connection, the trust, and the feelings of belonging that you need to have healthy conversations and heal hurt relationships or wounded relationships.
Right. Well, I think that's helpful, at least for me too, because very few of us, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not approaching a situation with a family member for the first time. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with this relationship that has just fallen apart because of such and such, whether it be religion, politics, whatever. So yeah, you have to be able to focus on what can I do now to help heal that relationship so that eventually we can get to the point where we can talk about these things. Some relationships you may never get to the point where you can talk about some things, but some will. And that's the hope here, is just for us to learn the tools, for me to learn the tools in order to make that happen.
Right. Well, and for me, you say, some people will engage and some people won't. Well, for me, again, it's about data. Yeah. If I'm going to approach a conversation and every single time I approach that conversation, I get a negative result where I can say it doesn't feel like that person is trying to communicate differently. It doesn't feel like that person is wanting to hear what I say. They're putting certain stipulations, these types of things. That's information. Is that a relationship that's in a place that's ready to be healed? And if the answer is no, sometimes we just have to grieve the fact that now's not the right time. And we really need to do a podcast on grieving, because there's so much more to the grief process than just the grief we feel with the loss of something or someone to death. Like there's a lot of grief here. You've got to identify that, for us, when I left the church, just my action of saying I'm not going to church anymore was an emotional wound for you.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it was a perceived threat. Mason is still recovering from the flu, y'all.
Yeah, it's been a week for you guys. It's still been just a day for me. I'm still struggling with that. Yeah, just absolutely. You said perceived. For me, absolutely, it was a perceived threat.
And for your family perceives me as a threat.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, because I'm an outspoken person, they're probably afraid to let their kids be around me because I'm outspoken. I'm pretty good at honoring boundaries. If I'm around your kids, I'm not going to be teaching your kids something different than you're teaching them.
Right.
When they're still kids. Like
right.
Once they're adults, if they come to me and ask,
right,
I'm going to treat them like an adult.
But they don't know you well enough to know
right.
that. At least some of them. Like one of them does.
Yeah.
You know, one of my siblings absolutely knows you
two
well
of them.
enough. Maybe two. Well, one knows you well enough to know that that's the case. One of them just isn't as worried because their situation is different. But one of them knows you well enough to know you're not going to walk into their home and start doing stuff that they wouldn't approve of. They just know that.
Right. Or if I did do or say something they didn't approve of, they know that it's safe to say,
right. They
hey,
can say,
Sarah,
don't do that.
I don't appreciate that. Can you?
Right.
And yeah, absolutely. All right. So again, that review of yesterday is you've got to be able to utilize the data to examine whether or not the relationship is ready. Now, if you're talking about within spouses and whatnot, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, Mason, is that you and I really fumbled through this. Like I was forcing certain things on you, maybe not in the most appropriate way and whatnot. The reason that we really pushed so hard through this was because our relationship was one of marriage. And if we were to, if I was going to continue to stonewall you, I'm hurting our children and, divorce and whatnot. So,
sure.
So you've also got to, kind of weigh in what sacrifices am I going to make to work through this? Because when I see couples, I don't expect them to have changes in a week or two or in one or two conversations. Like this is something that we're going to utilize. So one of the other things is that it's going to be important for both parties on both sides of the issue to be in a place where they are wanting and willing to engage in what Sue Johnson calls a dialogue dance, which is both parties are wanting to be respectful and understanding. Again, from yesterday, our goal is not to convince people about the truthfulness of the Mormon Church or the lack of truthfulness of the Mormon Church. Rather, the goal of the conversation needs to be understanding where the other person is at and what their experiences and emotions are so that you can foster and nurture the relationship while you go your separate ways.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two things I'd like to add to that. First, I don't think that was you deviating from this process at all. You read the room. You know me well enough to know that if there was going to be movement on this issue, you were going to have to push more.
If I want to help Mason change, I have to push him off a cliff.
Well,
and then he sprouts his wings and he flies and he lands back up next to me and he's like, "Why did you push me?" And then a week later he's like, "Oh yeah."
Well, that's part of knowing the people in your life, right? So if you're trying to have a conversation with someone that you don't know very well, there's probably going to be more fumbling because you don't know what they need. Mm-hmm. In this case, you didn't know how I would respond. You just knew that if there was going to be movement, you had to push more.
Right. So this is why Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Snap are such a train wreck, because we're having arguments and debates with people we do not even know. Right. And it's so unhealthy.
And it's
totally entertaining, but it's so unhealthy.
And it tends to be very impersonal, even when it's with someone you know. And the second thing that I wanted to add,
I want to slow you down. I love that you said that, because if you're going to engage in these conversations, it needs to be with somebody that you have a personal relationship with. Like this conversation that we're going to talk about today, this is personal.
Yeah.
So if the individual you're engaging in isn't going to have that type of an influence in your life, maybe you need to rethink what you're saying or doing or how you're engaging. Go ahead,
Right,
Mason.
yeah. Well, and the second thing is actually it's on the first page of what you had me read from Gottman, a little quote that's here, and it just says, "Do not argue for or try to persuade your partner of your point of view. Just explain how you see things. Tell your partner your thoughts and feelings about your position on the issue."
Okay, so pause. You can find this quote on the Gottman-Rappaport intervention worksheet. Go.
All right. And just it speaks to what is the intention of this conversation. If you go into the conversation trying to convince somebody of something, more often than not, you're probably going to fail. But if you go into the conversation just seeking to be understood and to understand, you may not get where you want to get in the conversation, but you will come out with better and more information than you had.
Right. Well, and, Mason, what you're talking about is the reason you're going to fail if you're trying to convince your partner of your point of view is nobody does convincing well. If I'm trying to change your opinion, my amygdala is going to get fired up. If I want somebody to be open to a change of mind or a change of viewpoint, I have to understand where they're coming from first.
Right.
I can't just go in and be like, no, you're wrong. And this is why you're wrong. And how can you not, how can you not read the CES? Like one of the biggest comments I'm getting right now from people, Mason, I think I've shared this with you, is how can Mason know all of this stuff and still believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as being true? And I go, I don't know. But it's not my job to convince you otherwise.
Right.
It's my job to understand where you are, which is why I check in with you all the time. And generally when I say, hey, Mason, where are you at with this? Your answer is, I don't know. Because you don't know. And that's okay. That's where you are. I can accept that. We can move on and we can find value in the things that we still agree on. Yeah. And so as you approach these conversations, if your goal is to convince somebody or take them out of a religion that they love or bring them back to a religion, you're going to cause emotional harm. It's because you are yanking against their defense mechanisms. Rather, if you work to understand where they are, extend that love, it doesn't change the type of our relationship, and let's focus on the things that we still have in common, you can have those connective relationships and grow into something where either, you eventually become on the same page about some things, or if you never get to that point, you have a healthy, wholesome, connective relationship with the people that you love and appreciate.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So are we ready to dig in?
I think so.
Okay.
No time like the present.
No time like the present. No, that's not true. Sometimes bedtime is not in my present, and I'm just looking forward to it.
Yeah, that means let's do it now, right?
Bedtime it's 11 o'clock in the morning here.
Sometimes.
Alrighty. So rule number 1. Oh, you might want to get a pencil and a paper. Or also, feel free to listen to this podcast a couple of times. I'm going to go through this information fairly quickly. So if you're the type of person that learns best by taking notes and those types of things, absolutely go get that, be prepared, pause, hit the pause button, and let's...
I'm not sure you can actually learn this material from having heard it just one time, right? This is the kind of stuff you need to hear or read and then practice and then go back and read it again and practice and then include somebody. Yeah.
Right.
You spend a lot of time in your clinic practicing and teaching these things because it's not just here you go, now fly and be free.
I can't just hand them the worksheet and say your marriage is cured.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, sometimes I have clients who think that's all they need. Like I give them this. So I handed Mason one of my little folders that I use when I do my couples counseling that has all of the worksheets in one place. And they bring that back to each session, or they're supposed to bring it back each session. I normally have to give them the office copies because most people don't bring it back each session, even though, yeah, whatever. Anyway.
That reminds me of a story. A squirrel here for a second, right?
Squirrel.
Listening to Brene Brown talk about the first time, so she had done all of her research, her initial research about shame, and she was trying to put it together, and she couldn't figure out how to get it put together and what it meant. And so she went to a therapist. She walked into the therapist, and she's like, look, I don't want to do any of that, like, sentimental crap or whatever, right? She's like, I just want to get down to what is wrong. Tell me what's wrong and how can I fix it? You have 6 weeks.
Right.
Just the idea that sometimes we have unrealistic expectations. We don't maybe know the depth of the issue and how to fix. Sometimes you probably could come in and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. And you're like, oh, that's simple. Boom, here you go. But most of the time, things are deeper than that.
That's, again, we've got an expectation that we're engaging in this conversation to solve a problem.
Right. Right.
We've got to shift that expectation. We're not
Right.
trying to solve a problem. We're not trying to get somebody to agree with us or see things our way. We're seeking understanding. You know, the Gottmans talk about within every complaint there is a longing. And that is so true. If I want to sit here and say, you know, like with your family, I would love to have a relationship with them where I can have a conversation about the church and it doesn't turn into this like heated political debate. I just want them to understand that I think Joseph Smith was a con man and I respect the fact that they don't.
Right.
Like,
and there can be mutual respect on that, despite
Right.
what some people seem to think.
right. If I say I think Joseph Smith's a con man and he was tried for it and whatnot, I'm going to get, that was a misunderstanding and you're wrong and how dare you, you know, speak about my, and I'm just like, okay. You know, this is, for me, this is the same thing as Mason. You love the old Superman movies and I think they're ridiculously stupid. Uh-oh. We might need to pause and do some Gottman conversations. Did I
think
tickle
you'd
your
better
amygdala?
just move on.
But I can dislike the Superman movies, and Mason can absolutely adore them, and we can enjoy a conversation, and we can chuckle about some of the
'Cause it's not
ridiculousness of the movie and talk about what's inspiring about it and enjoy it. I don't have to agree with your opinion on the movie for us to have a meaningful conversation about it. And that is one of the areas where I find that Mormons are emotionally immature in that there's an expectation that you understand and identify the things I find as truth. And if you don't, you're wrong, and that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and I think it almost even, it goes a little bit beyond that too, in that, because I know I've struggled with this as something I've identified in myself, or maybe you identified in myself, I'm not sure.
Who's the boss of you?
Anyway, that any kind of deviation from what you believe in a high demand religion feels like a personal attack. So when you say, I believe Joseph Smith was a con man, I've had to train myself to not take that personally. Like, because you say Joseph Smith is a con man, suddenly you're attacking me, which doesn't help you or me. And that's not what you're intending to do either. And I think that Mormons struggle with that. I would imagine that that's probably the case too for a lot of high demand religions, that talking about a differing opinion about the religion is not a personal attack.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not but it can be. It can be.
I'm not saying right, sure, it can be. A lot of
us in that post-Mormon or ex-Mormon community, we're not very nice. We're not.
True enough, yeah.
We share the evidences for what made us leave, and then we tend to shame, like, how can you be so stupid and still believe this after I've showed you all this stuff?
Right.
You know, so yeah, both parties are guilty of you're not agreeing with me.
That's a good point.
How dumb are you?
That's a good point. It happens on both sides.
It happens on both sides. So once again, you've got to go into the conversation seeking understanding. So, Mason, why don't you read that quote again off of the Gottman-Rappaport intervention? You can find this in its full color version from the Gottman Institute at Gottman.com, Gottman.com. Go, Mason.
And I'll put that into the show notes just so that it's there, just
Perfect.
so the link is right there for you.
Yeah, for you mean the Gottman.com link?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that sounds great.
So this is under the section that says rules for the speaker. Your task is to honestly talk about your feelings and beliefs about your position on this issue. Do not argue for or try to persuade your partner of your point of view. Just explain how you see things. Tell your partner your thoughts and feelings about your position on this issue.
Absolutely. And so
Emphasis added.
Emphasis added. I love it. You did a great job, babe. You can have the quotes all the time. Okay. So, yay. So anyway, when you're engaging in these conversations, you're going to take one of two roles. And those two roles are the speaker or the listener. And there are different rules for engagement depending on what role you are in. So right now, I'm the speaker and y'all are the listener. So you better obey the rules. I'm just teasing. I'm the teacher. So, but as you shift back and forth between these two roles through what Sue Johnson, who is I think she's the ACT person. Anyway, Sue Johnson, I can't remember her book is right here at the tip of my tongue, but it's not coming out. But I'll find it in a little bit and add that in here. But she calls them
Johnston with a T.
No, I think it's Johnson.
Okay.
Joh. Yeah, Sue Johnson. So anyway, she calls these dialogue dances, and really what it is respecting and staying in your role until the time in the conversation is appropriate for those roles to switch. So as the speaker in the conversation, you want to talk about your feelings first. Did you find it, Mason? So she is the founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy, or EFT. And she has written the book, Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love by Dr. Sue Johnson, EDD. And she calls these roles, the Gottmans call them the speaker and the listener, and Sue Johnson calls them dialogue dances. So anyway, we want to talk about your feelings first. When it comes to having healthy dialogue, feelings always come first. So this looks very much in the Gottman curriculum. They very much teach you to start your sentences with I feel, insert your feeling. Then when you describe the issue from a very objective point of view, like as if you were watching it on television, and then you do what they call an I need statement. That's a great formula in the beginning. What I try and teach my couples is to come back to the feeling frequently enough in the conversation so that the opportunity, or that what the Gottmans call bid for connection, is there. Because what I'm wanting and what we are seeing in healthy communication styles is the listener's ability to respond to the emotion. And I'm going to give you some examples of this here in just a minute. The other thing that you want to do, so you want to talk about your feelings. The other thing is you want to talk about your own experiences and your own opinions, and you want to state them as such. So this might look like, such and such happened to me, and the way that I understood that, or the way that I perceive this issue, or in my experience, I feel or I think. One of the things that really comes up in the ex-Mormon or post-Mormon community that's really aggravating about those still within the Mormon church is that they apparently know everything. I mean, they start their statements with, I know the church is true, and I know Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and I know you're deceived by Satan, and I can tell you're deceived because you are falling away, or because you are asking these questions, or because you looked at material not published by the church. And that is really off-putting. If I know something about you and I state it in that way, I'm going to get your amygdala fired up. Whether or not I'm right or wrong does not matter.
Right.
That, it would be, I'm worried about you. There's that feeling. I'm worried about you. I'm afraid you might have been deceived by Satan because you're looking at outside sources when I've taught you from the time you were little not to, that those are dangerous and that those can be deceitful. That would be an appropriate engagement. Now, do I feel like I've been deceived by Satan by looking at outside sources? No. For me, Sarah Westbrook, I'm like, not looking at outside sources is a little odd. That seems a little cultish, but I don't want to be like, no, I'm allowed to look at outside sources. Not looking at outside sources is a sign that the Mormon Church is a cult. Okay, that might be diagnostically accurate. But if I respond in that way, I'm going to aggravate that amygdala. Rather, what I would say in that type of situation is something along the lines of, in my work, I have come to value outside sources and outside opinions as influential in better understanding what is true and what is not true. I really struggle and feel suspicious when I'm told not to look at sources not published by the Mormon Church. It makes me think or feel that they're trying to hide something, and that leaves me feeling like I just can't trust the information that I'm being told. So I'm hoping, listeners, that you can see the difference. Mason, did you want to chime in on this? Because you're like, Mason's got his poop face on, which means he's either angry, thinking, or pooping. You look like you're thinking over there, babe, since you're not on the toilet.
Well, yeah, hopefully it's not that one. Yeah. Thank you
love
for that.
you.
Yeah. Whew. Need a minute. Getting a little flushed.
I hope our listeners can chuckle.
Just thinking, just processing. I've gone through some of this before. You and I have talked about it before. I've talked about it a little bit with my counselor, and just learning how to communicate appropriately and recognizing my biggest issue really is not in the way you and I converse about this kind of stuff. It's in the way that me and my children converse. I'm having a hard time still trying to apply this to them.
Can you be a little bit more specific and explain that with, like, let's take the example this morning. If you had used this okay, so let me give the backstory. So this morning we had a meal that's called German pancakes. They're not actually German. My German friends looked at me like I was nuts. They're Dutch pancakes, but it's a puffy egg pastry. We serve it with syrup. It's a meal from my childhood that my mom used to make, and it is one of our family favorites. And it's pretty easy to cut through it, but Abigail was struggling to cut through it because the plastic of her plate was kind of like doming up. So there's a little mountain in the middle of her plate. So when she would go to cut it, the plate would move around, and she was having a hard time with that. How might this have, so Mason says, you've got to cut it. You're not allowed to what was she doing? Eating it like a dog with this huge.
She was just taking her fork and picking up the whole thing and then biting a piece off of it.
So it was like the size of a 3x5 card piece of this pancake
and she's
pastry
9 years
dish.
old. It's time to start focusing on her
table manners.
What I asked for wasn't unreasonable.
No, not at all. But you said you have to cut it.
My struggle in these types of situations is almost always, I think I understand what's going on. I think that she's just being difficult. She just doesn't want to do it because I told her to.
Because she is being difficult, but not for difficult sake.
Right, and sometimes she is, but it feels to me like she's being obstinate. Maybe that would be a better word.
There you go.
She's being obstinate, not just difficult.
So you're taking her personal struggle personally.
Yeah.
It's her struggle, and you're becoming offended by her struggle.
It is one of the biggest problems that I have in communicating with my kids right now is that when they don't do what I've asked them to do, I'm taking it personally, and it's making it hard or impossible for me to understand them and meet them at their level. And so in this case, instead, what would have been better is probably exactly what you did and just say, hey, how come you're struggling to cut? Or
Right.
can you
I
show
said-
me what you're doing?
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, Abby, why don't you bring your plate and your pancake and your fork over
Right.
here? Show me what you're doing.
And she did it exactly right?
Right,
She
she
was
did
doing exactly what she needed to do.
No, she wasn't. She was cutting the fork down. Oh, you mean she was trying to cut? Yeah,
She was
her
correctly
motions-
performing the
Right, her
what
motions
would
were
be expected.
right, and it was
But it
not
was not being
cutting,
effective.
Right,
Yes.
it wasn't effective, and I identified it. It's because the plastic plate was like warped
Right.
a little bit, so she wasn't getting the grip and the whatever.
Well, and then
down.
I
And
could
so
have.
I just said, "Hey, Abby, why don't you go get a plate like what Mommy has?" So instead of a plastic warped plate, she went and got one of our little Corelle dishes, and we just transferred her pancake onto that dish, and then I said, "Okay, try again." And of course, it worked just fine.
Right.
I was like, "Man, those plates are pesky, aren't they?"
Right.
And then she went and showed you, "Look, Dad, I did cut it. Look, I was successful."
Right.
So yeah, again, that's that I'm taking somebody else's struggle or somebody else's opinion or belief or experience to be a personal attack upon me.
Right. So two of the biggest ways in which I fail in these situations is I take it personally when they don't do it exactly as I've said or whatever. And secondly, I don't take the time to understand what's going on. I assume that I know, and so I don't take the time to confirm or change what I understand about the situation.
Well, and that was your biggest struggle when I told you I was leaving the church. You assumed that I had been led astray. You assumed that the church's website had been hacked and that the LDS gospel topic essays were like somebody had gotten in there and the church just hadn't taken them off. I had to tell
Right.
you, no, they've been there since like 2013 or 14 or whatever. And then you were like, whoa, okay, hang on. You assumed that I was falling away. You approached me very much in bearing your testimony, kind of doubling down on all these principles. And I got really aggravated because I was like, Mason, I know all of these arguments. I've been a member for 38 years. Like I was trained to give the same argument, and I wouldn't even let you finish your argument because I was like, dude, just stop already. And that wasn't effective because I was trying to silence you because you were ticking me off.
Right.
But that's
Because
that's
I
gonna
wasn't
be-
listening. Yeah.
Right, but for our Mormon families that are still actively engaged in that faith community, that's going to be their initial response because it's what they've been trained to do from the time they were little. I mean, I can remember lesson after lesson after lesson that an apostate is somebody who leaves the church after having the truth and that they become dangerous, that they're going to attack the church. They're
Yeah.
going to do all of these things. And
They're
so
going to
it's-
drag you down with them.
Right, they're going to drag you down with them. They're going to lead you astray. You need to be really cautious. Like, try and invite them back. But once you've identified that they're not coming back, you pretty much need to
You need to leave
don't
them alone.
leave them
you
alone.
need to walk away. Yeah.
Right, and there's even scriptures or prophecies that that the ex-Mormon population or the apostates are going to fight against the church harder than any other group. And yet, if you look at most of the people who have left the church, they don't talk about it. I mean, if you look at like who's gone public with their voices in loud ways, the number is pretty small. Like, all right, so you got John Dehlin, evil apostate, RFM and Bill Reel, me. There's lots of podcasters out there. Nemo the Mormon. Okay, I guess we might be the ones that are speaking out. But I would say most of us aren't speaking out to harm the church. We're speaking out to foster community for those people in struggle. But it doesn't matter. That's our intent. That's our goal. And I would say most people who actually engage with that material feel that way, that it's a safe community for people in struggle. And yet those within the Mormon religion who aren't engaging in that material are still going to say that's anti, they're dangerous, they're attacking the church. I mean, we had just on Facebook the other day, your cousin who claimed that we were trying to pull people out of the Mormon church because of the title of our podcast.
Well, and I don't feel like that is what he said, but he did talk about that. So, but anyway, I just wanted to be able to pull out because for me it's personal, because I want to learn how to do this better, and I'm hoping that is why others are listening too, is they want to learn how to do this better. And so recognizing some of those big pitfalls is helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for others too. So don't assume you understand, and don't take it personally when somebody doesn't follow along with what you have to say.
Right. Don't take it personal when somebody has a different opinion than you.
Yeah.
The main reason people have different opinions than you is because they have different life experiences than you. They have different traumas. They have different successes. They have different areas of expertise. They have a different way of learning things. They have their own perspectives. It's not personal. It is a reality of life.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So,
All
anyway,
right.
so go ahead and go on.
As the speaker, the other thing is that you really want to stick with your story. We're not going to sit here and say, oh, well, and when so-and-so had this happen and that, and they did. You don't want to do that, because if that person's not in the room to express what's going on, you are misrepresenting them.
Or at least could be. And that's dangerous.
And the way that Mason views the church does not influence my conversation with my sister about the church. Now, my sister could absolutely say, I'm really worried about Mason. I'm worried that you guys are going to have some marital struggles. Okay, my response to that is, yeah, this has been really hard for us. Yes, we've had some struggles, but I feel like we're doing pretty good.
Right.
We've done some counseling. Even though I'm a counselor, I can't counsel. I can't be the counselor of my marriage. That's doesn't work out very well. I know, we've tried. But I could say to my sister, if we need any support from you in this area, we'll reach out. But I can't talk about Mason's experiences when I'm talking to my sister about why I'm leaving, unless Mason's direct experience, if there's an opinion or something that I perceive from that is my own. So if it's, so like for me, one of the things that I struggled with is when the church called you to be the bishop right out of medical school and then didn't release you when you went to Afghanistan and so on and so forth. I definitely had some opinions on that did not help my testimony. But then I'm not talking about it from this bad thing happened to Mason and this was his perspective. Rather, it's this happened to Mason. This is how it impacted our marriage. And then I bring that right back to myself.
To you, yeah.
Right.
Well, I love that you said, what can I do for you in this situation? I feel like that would be a very good way for someone to respond, instead of, well, I got to testify, I got to save your soul. Well, Sarah, thank you for sharing. What can I do for you? Mm-hmm. Because maybe they are sharing because they want some testimony, they want some reassurance, they want some direction. Maybe they are. Mm-hmm. But if you assume that's what they want, oftentimes it'll go badly. But if you ask, what do you need? What can I do for you? Well, actually, what I need from you is just to accept the fact that this is where I am and still be there for me.
Right.
Like, I don't need you to try and change my mind. I don't need you to try and testify or teach me the gospel. I understand all of that stuff. I really just need support and love.
Well, and I think that it's important to say, because this is still so new for us, let's set a temporary boundary where when we're together, we don't talk about it.
Sure.
But then when we're ready to engage in conversation, let's set aside some time where it's just us. There's no distractions, because one of the things we talked about in episode 15 was you don't want to be having these conversations in a room full of 15 people because it's
Thanksgiving table.
Right. It's a hell of a lot harder to manage and negotiate 15 or 16 individuals' amygdalas and where they're responding. And I mean, look at the group text between your family. If you had sent that individually to everybody, you might have had 8 individual conversations, but brother number one and
wouldn't have had the blow up,
brother-in-law's, right, brother-in-law number one's comments, dumped a bunch of gasoline on brother-in-law's fire, and it just went to hell in a handbasket because the energy of the room was very hostile and inflammatory. Whereas if you had done that one-on-one, then that just makes things better. So,
Sure. And I was only thinking of myself really at that point in time. Like if I had been able to think about it and go, you know what, knowing my family, the likelihood is blah, blah, blah. Let me just go ahead and send everybody an individual text and just they know, and let's just see where it goes. So yeah, that's
absolutely
still learning from those kinds of things, and learning how it could have been done better and how to do it differently in the future.
Right. And what a great opportunity to gather data of what not to do. So y'all, when this goes to hell, because sometimes it will. In fact, you're going to struggle and muddle through it more often than not in the beginning as you and the other person get used to talking about things in this way.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to fuck it up. That's fine. It happens. Gather the data. What was the effort? Were they open? Was it good until? What got us? And you know, that would be, if you're looking at the Gottman stuff, the worksheet and the chapter that goes for that is called The Aftermath of a Fight or a Regrettable Incident. And that's where we talk about coming back together and acknowledging where the conversation fell apart and setting boundaries about how to do it differently the next time. And so that's that aftermath piece. Alrighty, so rules for the listener before we review this with an example. And we're going to give you a couple of examples of how to do this, so that way as you go forward, you have kind of some case study type things to build off of. So as the listener, rule number 1 is to prepare yourself. You are going to hear things that you don't agree with, that you don't like. There's also a huge possibility that the speaker's going to say it in a way that tickles that amygdala. Make sure you're taking some deep breaths and going slow and checking in with yourself. This is not meant to be, I'm going to come in, I'm going to tell you what I think, everybody's going to be happy and we're going to walk away and live happily ever after. This is not a Disney show. Okay, we love Disney because it's so magical. Real life is not as magical.
They're called fairy tales for a reason, right?
Yeah. So you want to be able to postpone your own agenda. Again, this is, what is the goal? If the goal is to convince the other person that they're wrong, that they've strayed, that they need to come back to church, that they need to leave the church, you're coming at the conversation in a way that is not going to end favorably. It's going to end with emotional hurt. You've also got to tune into your partner's world, is what this is. I'm like actually reading it right off the Rappaport thing. You've got to tune in to their world. You've got to be able to recognize that the people, so I'm going to say the Mormons in the church, are hurting because you've left.
Right, hurt on both sides.
There's pain on both sides.
My first thought actually was, when you said this, being attuned, you're asking the listener to do all the things that the listener really wants to have them do, or the speaker. Right. Yeah, so if I'm the one that wants to address my family, you're asking me to do all the things that I really want for them to do.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So listen to others the way you want them to listen to you.
Yeah. Well, then it has to start with me, because I'm the one that's learning this. It has to start with me, and I have to be able to...
I'm going to disagree. It does not have to start with you.
Well,
if you want the conversation to go differently, choose to engage in the conversation differently.
That's what I mean, is that I'm learning this stuff and learning how to do it in the hopes that the conversations can go better, and that eventually they'll learn that this is a better way to do things too. So, but I can't just sit here and go, I'm not having this conversation until they learn how to do this better. That probably won't work out very well.
Yeah. The next step is that I agree with that, by the way. I'm just like, my brain is going like 20 million miles a minute, like it always does.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. ADHD.
That I go fast. That explains the steam over your head right now.
I have steam over my head. Awesome.
Just because you're hot.
Oh. It's like the Carrie Underwood concert. It's just that fog so that I look better on stage.
Sure.
Alrighty, so your next step is you really want to hear and validate the other person's feelings. Again, feelings come first. So I know it's really hard to have somebody grieving something that you're rejoicing over. Like for me, I left the church. It was like this huge, heavy burden was lifted off of me. I felt like I could see things clearly for the first time in a long time. I felt like I had hope again. For me, it was joyous. That doesn't mean I can look at my husband and be like, dude, I'm like freaking happy. And why are you sad for me that I'm so happy?
Right.
There's a loss there. And whether it is a real loss or a perceived loss, it is real to the person experiencing it.
Yeah.
And so you're going to hear things that you disagree with. It is okay and healthy to validate the emotion. That doesn't mean you agree. I can tell Mason, I know that your heart is broken. I understand, and I can relate to feeling like you're losing your family and our status in the eternities. I know that's terrifying, and the unknown is really uncomfortable. I hear you. And I'm not going to follow that up with a but. We're going to leave the butts in their chairs where they go. No buts. What is it? No butts? No coconuts? What is that? That's a Disney cartoon, isn't it?
I don't know.
The kids would tell me. The other thing is that if you don't understand something the speaker is saying, you want to be able to ask them a clarifying question like, hang on a minute, I'm not following. Is this what you're saying? The temptation is to ask a question and bring the conversation back to you so you can assume the speaker's role again. We really want to avoid that. If you're not understanding what they're saying, say that. I'm not following you. I need to help me I'm not sure how you got from point A to point B. Like one of the things that Mason had to call out his family on is, why are you all blaming Sarah? Like this doesn't make any sense. I have my own brain because your family kept saying Sarah's a bad influence. You're just going along with whatever Sarah says. And you had to say, wait a minute, I'm not understanding where you're coming up with this. Help me understand this.
Right.
I have my own brain. I can think for myself. So it was, hang on, back up. Where's this coming from? Oh, well, Sarah. Oh, well, Sarah. Oh, well, Sarah. Okay. I can see how you've reached that conclusion. I believe you said to your dad, it feels to me like you guys are blaming Sarah for things that, you know, you're claiming she still has these personality traits that she exhibited back when she was an 18-year-old newly married teenager to me. That's not who she is now. And I have my own brain in my head. But you were able to say, I get where you're coming from. Like, I guess if we're saying that Sarah hasn't changed since she was 18, then it makes sense that you might think that she's, you know, exaggerating or whatever, these things that I definitely struggled with then, but that's not who she is now. Right. But you validated their thoughts or their feelings. You understood them. You can understand, you can validate without agreeing.
Hard for me to learn. A very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. The other thing is you've got to watch the Four Horsemen. Again, you've got to avoid criticism or contempt. Contempt is sarcastic humor. It's making fun of somebody. It's belittling statements, okay? Defensiveness. One of the ways that the Gottmans describe defensiveness that I really appreciate is that defensiveness is a sneaky way of blaming the other person for how you feel. Defensiveness is the first sign for most people that your amygdala is tickled. If you're feeling defensive, check in with yourself. It's rarely because of the other person. It's self-protective. And when you speak from a defensive place, you're speaking with a diminished frontal cortex. You are speaking with less logic, with less rational thinking skills, and with less creative problem solving. It's okay to be defensive. It's not a bad thing. It's informative. So make sure you're taking those lessons. And again, this is why you're coming in prepared. The Gottmans talk about summarizing and reflecting back what you hear, which is really important, but it doesn't look like mirroring. I know that, when I first started, I was actually in school and they taught us the value of mirroring, which is basically if you come to me and you're like, I'm going to go to the store, then I'm going to grab the milk at the store, then I'm going to run by the post office, then I'm going to come home. Mirroring would be like, okay, so what I heard you say was you're going to go to the store, you're going to run to the post office, and then you're going to come home. Yes, that is mirroring.
You do that all the time.
I do, but I don't do it. Don't do it exact. I don't reword you word for word. So what I hear is it's going to take you about 20 minutes to go to the store and the post office. So it's reasonable for me to expect you home in about 20 minutes. Yes, Sarah, that's reasonable. That's reflecting back what I'm hearing without mirroring. Mirroring is like parroting. You're going to go to the store. You're going to go to the post office. Then you're going to come home.
I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to go to the post office. Then I'm going to come home.
Right. It's obnoxious. It's annoying. And it's not sustainable. Instead, I can say, so I can expect to see you within the next 20, 30 minutes, depending on the lines at the grocery store. Yes, that sounds appropriate. Bam. I've reflected back, but I have not parroted back.
Makes sense.
This is where you're checking for understanding. I will oftentimes with my clients do something like, I want to make sure I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, what I hear you saying is, and then I will repeat it back in my own words. And that's where my clients will be like, no, that's not what I said. And it doesn't matter the words that came out of their mouth. It's what they heard or what I heard and how I perceived that. And so this is where you get to check in for, is the person understanding what I've said? Are they engaged? Are they hearing me? And am I hearing them? Because if they say, yes, that's what I'm saying, well, then guess what? You now have the opportunity to extend that empathy. And once you've done that, then you can switch places. You don't switch out of listener role until the person who was speaking to you feels heard and understood.
Not to mention that kind of statement comes from a place of curiosity. I am trying to understand what you said. Whereas what happens too often in argument is, no, you said, and now we've immediately become defensive and attacking and things instead of just saying, okay, wait, I thought I heard you say. And then they can say, no, I'm sorry, that's not what I said, or no, I didn't mean that, or whatever. It gives you the chance to repair the conversation before you're attacking each other over whatever was done.
Usually what happens if it's like you said and you're like, no, I didn't say that, then my natural response is, yes, you did. You said this and then you said this. And suddenly you're arguing about the words that came out of your mouth that unless you've recorded the conversation, you can never prove who's right and who's wrong.
No one knows for sure.
Nobody knows I mean, you might think you do.
And now you're distracted from what you're trying to talk about. You're arguing about what was said instead of discussing what it is that you wanted to discuss.
And so other ways that you can do this is, so what I get or my understanding based on what you've told me is this, is that accurate? Have I reflected this back to you? Am I getting it or am I off base? That gives the speaker the opportunity to correct it or restate it. Because sometimes if you're like me, I kind of sometimes will figure out how I feel about something as I'm saying it out loud. And I'm like, oh, that's not what I feel.
Sure.
Let me redo that.
Wait a second.
Take two, take 3, take 7, take 27. Mason, you're a very patient man when we get to take 27.
And ultimately, again, you come back to what is the intention here. The intention is not to finish the conversation.
It's not to solve the problem.
Right.
It's not to bring somebody in or out. It is to understand. Absolutely.
Once both parties are understood, then I suppose you can move on to something like, okay, well, now what do we do? Right? But the intention is understanding. And if you come to the conversation with that intention, you're going to be more successful. And you might get to the point where you can fix something. But if you come to the conversation with the intent to fix something, you probably won't be successful.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Mason. I love that. All right. So we're going to do 2 examples of conversation. I'm going to kind of demonstrate with you, and Mason, please feel free to chime in. But I'm going to demonstrate with you if you're coming at, I've left the Mormon church because of complicated historical issues, how you would start a conversation coming from that place. So that way you can kind of see these skills at work. And then the other example that I'm going to give is coming at it from a place of an emotional issue where you're struggling because of the emotional burden, or, like for me, I left the church because of experiences and things not improving and getting burned out. And it was like this little continuation. So I want to be able to do both of those. That I want us to be able to approach the situation from both aspects. So I'm going to start with the historical one first. One of the things that I like about doing it from the historical place first is that it's not as personal. When I'm talking about my experiences growing up, if I talk about, let's say, the feminist issues within the church where I never have an equal voice, and somebody says, no, you're just misunderstanding, that becomes a lot more personal. That one's a harder conversation to have. I would say that those types of conversations, you want to make sure that you've had lots of conversations where that empathy and that understanding and that mutual respect has been present, because the natural tendency is to go back to those, we talked about internal and external sources. Forever and ever, women in the Mormon church have been told that they have equal rights and that the church depends on them for all of these things. But then you look at things like a woman never has the final say in anything without going to the man. And in heaven, the woman doesn't create the world. She's just the baby maker, blah, 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 blah. You can start to kind of differentiate between what the church is teaching and what is actually going on. But because that's an experiential thing, it's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more emotionally provoking. So I would say start with some of those, again, those easier topics first. So once again, goal is understanding. Goal is finding some common ground to work from. So when I left the church, I did not tell Mason about all of the experiential stuff because I knew that he was not ready, because he was not in a place where he was connecting emotionally with me anyway. Talking about my emotional experiences just did not feel safe. And so instead, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the first vision. So I'm going to take a less sticky historical issue, one that the LDS Church has acknowledged as factual. Okay, so that's really important, because in the beginning, I want the member of the church to be able to say, yes, the church acknowledges this as factual.
Right.
Because I want these people to, I want you as the speaker to have the best chance for being heard. And so I would say, for starters, go with things that are in the gospel topic essays on the LDS Church's website, things that they acknowledge as factual. So these could be, Joseph Smith and the Rock and the Hat. These could be Joseph Smith and the first vision. So we'll go ahead and start with the first vision. So I gave Mason the CES letter. So it's been made into a book. I have the book. I'm holding it in my hand right now. It's the CES. It's called CES, all in caps, letter, My Search for Answers to My Mormon Doubts. And this letter was written by Jeremy T. Runnels. You can find this on, oh goodness, I Googled it and got to his website, and then I ordered the book. But you can also get this same document in PDF form, and you can download it for free.
It's on the show notes as well.
And it's also in our show notes. So one of the things that happens is that the Mormon Church has acknowledged is that there are multiple accounts written by Joseph Smith regarding the first vision. Okay, so basically meaning Joseph Smith wrote down his experience multiple times. And so in the CES letter, we've got the 1832 handwritten account the two 1835 accounts, so it was written twice in 1835. The account that was written in 1838, which is the official version, and the last one is the 1842 account. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 accounts that they've got right here. And so I'm quoting from page 38 of the CES letter book. In the only handwritten account by Joseph Smith, penned in 1832, but not publicly published until much later, describes the first vision in an unfamiliar way. And by unfamiliar, they're talking about unfamiliar to Mormons because it is very different than the account that is the official version that was written in 1838. And some of those differences, and this is the factual thing, is that there's no mention of 2 beings, that the first account was not written down until 12 years after the vision happened. His age in the first account is 15, so in the 16th year of his age. So there's some debate about how old he was, which they didn't keep track of dates the same way we do. So, we can go from there. And that there was also no reference in this account about asking which church he should join. And there was no description in this first account of being attacked by Satan. So there's your history. This is, again, I'm coming right out of the CES letter book. Jeremy Runnels has cited every one of these things so that way you can go through. When I got this, I did it on the internet, and I went down and I chased down the sources, but I believe you can find the copy of this first handwritten account on the LDS's website, LDS Church's website.
I believe so.
Now.
I think that they're all linked there, that you can,
right.
Each one is there for you to read.
Right.
Because I remember doing that.
Right. And that's why I want to start with something where my Mormon family member or friend can search it out on the church's website, because if you're an active member of the Mormon church, you've been taught that looking at the CES letter is an act of apostasy and that it's full of lies.
Right.
You're not going to look at that. You're not going to find that as credible. And as I'm coming into this conversation, I have to respect the fact that my Mormon family, friends, peers, whatever, are not going to find these sources of information as credible or valid. So I want to start from a place.
Reading the room.
Right. I got to read the room. I've got to know what they're going to place value in. So as I come to this family member and they say, tell me one of the things that led you out of the church, like just give me just one. This might be a good one for me. And I would approach it I felt very confused by the fact that there were at least 5 accounts of the first vision written by Joseph Smith, that the official account didn't mention things like there being 2 distinct beings. That really bothers me. I would think that if I had God and Jesus standing right in front of me, that would absolutely make it into that first account. I think that
it's kind of its significance.
Right. I think that calling them an angel in one of the accounts rather than God the Father and Jesus Christ, I feel that that's, again, a significant difference in those earlier accounts. For me, it sounds like the story may have grown and been exaggerated and stretched into what we have now. And I have a really hard time trusting somebody whose story changes that substantially. Now, this person might say to you, well, that's normal, we all grow our stories over time. And whatnot. That's a pretty common response. That's one that I definitely got. And so your response might be, you're right. I agree. It is pretty normal. If I listen to grandpa's stories from when he was a kid, it's pretty normal for them to get a little bit blown up and a little bit more dramatized and whatnot. But some of those key elements, like who was there, who wasn't there, those things tend to stay the same. And so for me, this one was really hard for me to swallow, and it really led to me questioning the credibility of Joseph Smith as an honest person.
And that makes a lot of
Period.
sense. Yeah, you period. This is the reason that I struggled with this particular issue, and you've given them the information, both information that they maybe don't trust and information they probably will trust, for them to investigate for themselves. But ultimately, this is how I felt about that situation.
Right.
You're still focused on the emotion,
I'm
not
talking
so
about the feelings.
much
I feel
the event.
confused.
Right.
If this was me, I would think that I had. I'm not sure if I can trust. Again, another feeling word. I feel maybe a little betrayed. I feel betrayed that I wasn't taught about these other versions in seminary. You might even say,
Right.
I feel betrayed because the church leaders knew about it, but it wasn't part of our curriculum. So that was difficult for me. You know, this is another, like Joseph Smith and the Rock and the Hat. Again, you can, go back to the gospel topic essays. And if you're from my generation, you can say, I feel really betrayed. I feel like they knew. Mason just dropped his fidget toy, a Rubik's Cube, onto his mic, y'all. I can say that I felt betrayed because the art in the buildings and my primary lessons, and even when I went on a mission, the art I used did not depict the way that Joseph Smith actually claimed to have translated the Book of Mormon. I struggle with that. It makes it hard for me to trust this. It makes me wonder what else they may have hidden. And so I'm having a really hard time. It makes me question things a lot. So again, remember, when I'm the speaker, I'm talking about my emotions. I'm talking about my own experiences, my own opinions, and I'm stating them as such. I'm falling back on the way I perceive that, or the way I understand that.
Right.
If somebody was to say to me, well, where did you read about that? I can say, well, I read it from the CES letter and I followed those sources, but I also found on the church's website that they acknowledge that what Jeremy Runnels says in the CES letter is accurate. And, I've read the CES letter and I know that that is viewed as an apostate material, but from my reading of it and from my own research of following those sources, it appears legitimate to me. Jeremy Reynolds' CES letter feels accurate. It doesn't feel like it's attacking the church. It feels like an honest inquiry into some of these troubling things. And it really got me thinking.
Right.
And the church's website supports that what's in there is factual or historically accurate as far as we can tell.
Right. At least some of it. Yeah.
Right.
A lot
so
of
Mason, if you're going to be responding to that, how would you respond to me? I'm going to put you on the spot. Respond to me. You just listened. Now you respond to me.
Well, first off, it would depend if this is me today or me 2 years ago.
You today, please. You today, please. We're demonstrating how to do this right. This is not the Berenstain Bears book of what you should not do. This is not the Berenstain Bears book where dad teaches the kid to ride the bicycle and this is what you should not do. Let's do what you should do, even though I hate that word. What we can do.
The first thing I want to say is I really appreciate you sharing with me where you're at with this. It matters a lot that your focus was on how it has made you feel, the struggles that you're having because of not so much the information, but because of what the information means to you. I don't really know what to do with that information. I appreciate you giving it to me, and I'll probably have to spend some time with it. But
I'm going to pause you. Focus on my feelings. Feelings come first. So you told me, I'm grateful you shared that with me. But you have not yet acknowledged that I feel confused and distrustful of Joseph Smith as a person based on this. How can you do that without agreeing with me that Joseph Smith is a lying, betraying con man?
I think I would just say, with the information that you shared, it makes sense that you would feel confused and even betrayed.
Okay, so listeners, that has to come first. I would say even before I'm really grateful that you shared this with me. It's got to come first. It makes sense to me that this is confusing. I've had questions about that myself at times. I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing this with me. Feelings come first. Keep going, Mason.
I think that'd probably be the end of what I would say initially, is just that I appreciate you sharing it. It makes sense that you're feeling what you're feeling. That's hard. I might add something along the lines of, I've felt betrayed before too. I've felt confused before, and I hate it. I don't like that feeling. So It makes sense that it would be bothering you as much as it did, especially when it's coming from a source that was supposed to be beyond dispute. That's not the word I'm looking for, but irreproachable.
Right. It's doctrine.
Right.
The 1938 version is considered
Right.
doctrine.
So now we're talking about something that is doctrinal, and many prophets have said absolutely can't live without it. I can't remember the word I'm looking for. Absolutely can't live without this doctrine in our church.
Right.
It makes sense that you would feel betrayed.
It's the quote unquote proof that God and Jesus are two separate and distinct beings in Mormonism. Well, the fact that Joseph Smith supposedly saw them.
Well, and just the fact that because of that event, Joseph Smith was called to be a prophet, and therefore everything else came from that. Mm-hmm. Well, if you can call into question the initial, this is how he became a prophet, then of course everything
else falls into question.
So much can fall into a question or falls apart, and so it makes sense that would be confusing and feel like a betrayal to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mason. You did good. So when I had a similar conversation with my friend Laura, we were talking about the rock and the hat thing, and I kind of, expressed things to her in this manner. And she did a great job. She was, that was really confusing for, myself and my husband as well. And then after she finished validating me, she said the way that we've, viewed this in our own life is, and she gave what I would consider an apologetic answer for why they came to the conclusions she did. And I said, I can see how you can get from, this to there. Mm-hmm. That's not where my brain goes, but that makes sense that's where your brain went. And then we moved on in the conversation. Again, if we're not trying to convince the other person of what's right or wrong, I can validate her conclusions, even though I disagree with them. She can validate my conclusions, even though she disagrees with those. And we move on and we talk about, I don't even know, what the kids are doing.
Sure.
How the dog training's going, whatever.
Because Alrighty. Now you've felt heard. Mm-hmm. And that's the most important piece of the whole situation, is that you've felt heard.
Right. So now let's do an experiential one. So for me, this would look, and Mason, I'm going to have you once again
I get to be on the spot again?
Yep, you get to be. We're not going to show people how terrible I listen. Come on. No, this is...
Well, yeah, we can't do that.
No,
this is the way this goes. You're the expert. You do things the right way. I'm here for you to demonstrate how to do things the wrong way.
Well, I think that the listener's role is usually the harder role of the two. So I'm giving you the harder one, Mason. Congratulations.
Thanks.
But this time I want the audience to criticize you, Mason, constructive criticism, in the sense of, did he respond in a way that I want to be responded to on something like this?
Right. This is all about learning how to do it. So I don't mind being put on the spot, because I've done this correctly. I've also done this incorrectly. I've done it with you and with my kids and with other people.
Same for me. Like, what was it, 2 Wednesdays ago? You and I had an argument, and neither of us did this correctly. It was It was awful. So we definitely, this is, just because I have a lot of experience and I'm teaching you here does not mean I do this perfectly 100% of the time. All right, so this one we're getting close to the end here, so this one's going to be really, really quickly. But I'm going to talk about the 2015 policy about the LGBTQIA population, that the children born to parents who identify within the LGBTQIA population were not allowed to get baptized, and that they had to disavow their parents' sexuality at 18 in order to get baptized. That's the one I'm going to talk about. This is very experiential for me. So I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to, if somebody says, well, give me an example of when you felt like the prophet wasn't speaking for God. We'll just say that's the question.
All right.
That's coming up. And I'm going to say, that's really difficult because the prophets over the years have said a lot of really good things that I agree with, that, as a mental health professional, when they talk about loving others, or I was like singing praises to Elder Holland when he talked about depression and seeking help from qualified providers. I felt like that was very good. However, when the announcement about the children of LGBT parents could not get baptized, my heart sunk. I instantly felt, notice I used the word felt that could not have come from God. In my field of study, I knew that following that policy was going to create irreparable harm to familial relationships. And in a church that values families so much, I just could not see that this was something that came from God. It did not make sense to me. It really bothered me. And then when I saw the suicide rate jump disproportionately, when, like the suicide rate jumped in COVID, but that made sense. We took kids away from their peer groups, and there were lots of environmental things that shifted with COVID. But in 2015, the only thing that changed was that announcement, and to see the suicide rate go up with such statistical significance in highly populated LDS communities, that really confirmed to me that was a man-made rule and not something that I could ever see a God that I worship have any part of. And that really cracked my belief that Thomas S. Monson or Russell M. Nelson actually speak for God in the way that they claim that they do.
From what I know of you, it makes sense that the way a group or individual is treated mattered so much to you. One of the things that I love the most about you is the way that you treat people, and the way that you can, I don't even understand sometimes how, the way that you can see them and see past any of what you consider inconsequential things, and you consider a lot of things inconsequential when it comes to just loving the persons. It makes sense to me why that was such a devastating issue for you, because it was about people. In this case, it was about children. Like, it wasn't even the whole LGBTQ community, although that was a big part of it. But in this case, it was about children. Children were being marginalized in a way that I don't think has ever been appropriate. And so I think I understand why that was such a big issue for you.
I appreciate that, Mason. I know that came from the heart for you. I hate criticizing it now. Constructive criticism. Beautifully stated, absolutely. You didn't use the word devastating. You did not use that emotional word first. It came about 4 or 5 sentences into your response. So what I want you to do differently is that announcement must have been devastating for you. And then everything else that you said. Because everything you said was good, it was valid, I felt heard, I felt understood. I know you well enough to know that the emotion comes a few minutes in. But for our listeners, when you're engaging in this in the beginning, that emotion has to be identified first. Because my natural inclination is to take what you're saying to me, Mason, and be like, well, yeah, and build it up even more, because the emotion, the feeling inside of me has to be seen, acknowledged, and validated. So knowing you, Sarah, I can only begin to comprehend how devastating that announcement must have been for you. And then I'm going to say, yeah, it's what broke me. That was the announcement that broke me. That was the beginning of the end for me.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, yeah, I'm going to have you respond more often because it makes me feel good.
Well, don't forget for the listener too, right? Prepare yourself, be attuned, right? I'm in the mind space right now to respond in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
Now, if you asked me this at home as we're getting dinner ready and we started talking about this, you probably wouldn't get that same kind of response from me because it's not my natural response. It's not the way that I would immediately go, this is how I need to respond to that. I need some time in my head or to know that we're in this deep conversation for me to be able to focus on how to respond appropriately. Because I'm, in general, a very good listener, but I'm having to learn how to be a more active listener, particularly in the way that I respond to what's being said.
So, yeah, absolutely. I love that you said that you have to be, basically in the right brain space, because really what it is prepare yourself and prepare the room. Reading the room, you've got to go in ready to engage in these types of conversations. I would recommend avoid doing this via text message or even voice texting, because you are losing the ability to read the listeners and the speakers, the participants, verbal and nonverbal cues on something that is so challenging. So my invitation to the listeners today is, if you want to have a conversation with somebody about why you've left the church or why you want them to come back to church, or that you're just trying to understand them, maybe have them listen to this episode and say, hey, you might hear some things that you disagree with and whatnot, but I feel that the communication skills that, Sarah and Mason talked about today are really helpful. I'd like to try this, because it's really hard to have this type of conversation with somebody who doesn't know the rules for the speakers and the rules for the listeners. That's a great way to open yourself up to get burned. Because if I was to go, Mason, to your brother number one that told me that my relationship was doomed, or brother-in-law, and tried to do this, they don't know the rules for engagement. They are going to jump because they don't know any better. It's not that they're bad people. They're very good people. They really are. They do a lot of good for their communities. They're kind. As far as I can tell, they take care of their families, love their spouses, love their kids. They're doing the best they know how, but they don't know how to engage differently, which is why they f***ed it up so bad in that text, because they didn't know a different way.
Yeah.
So I would, if they can't listen to this podcast, then I would definitely recommend getting on the Gottman Institute, pulling these things off, and having a how do we talk to each other respectfully talk before you jump into the hard things like help me understand why you left the church or why you won't come back or all of those things.
First, let me help you understand how we can talk about this in a respectful way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I find I'll end with this, in my clinic when I work with couples, no matter what is going on, the first things that I teach, as long as they're safe. If they're not safe, if there's lots of abuse and danger, then we get them safe. And then the first thing that I do is I teach them about their frontal cortex and their amygdala. I teach them how to respond when the conversation is going bad, so that way they don't continue harm. Then I teach them how to communicate like this. Because until they have those communication skills, they can't heal the other stuff going on. Once they have the communication skills in place, once they know how to engage in communicating their needs, now we dig into what's going on in the relationship. Now I take the emotionally focused stuff and the hold me tight stuff from Sue Johnson and the 5 love languages and the 5 love languages and hold me tight. For me, my clinical practice, if you don't know how to talk to each other without those 4 horsemen that the Gottmans talk
Right.
about. If you don't know how to engage in healthy communication patterns, all the other stuff is going to fall apart. It's not sustainable. Whereas learning how to engage in healthy communication skills, that is step number 1, and everything else can be worked through once you know how to do it, once you know how to talk about it.
Yeah.
So absolutely, before you engage with family, either listen to this podcast or find another source. I highly recommend the Gottmans. It has so much research to back its efficacy. It's like over 80 to 83% effective. I know that in my clinic, my stats are right around 87% of couples that come to me for marriage counseling stay married, and at 3 years out are still happily married and say that the counseling is what changed their lives. And that's not because I'm an awesome therapist. It's because I'm using research-based interventions, and what
Right.
I'm using is Gottman.
Right. But you are an awesome therapist, too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yep. Thanks for being here.
See you next time. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life. Mason's got his poop face on, which means he's either angry, thinking, or pooping.